A global push to recognize a Palestinian state is gaining momentum, with France leading the way and others likely to follow. But with Hamas still ruling Gaza, is this move legitimizing terror? And could it actually prolong the war instead of bringing it to a close? I'm Maayan Hoffman, executive editor at ILTV, and this is ILTV Insider. Tonight, I have with me Maurice Hirsch, director of the Initiative for Palestinian Authority, Accountability and Reform at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. And I have with me Dan Feferman, co-founder of Middle East24, chairman of Sharaka, and a major in the IDF intelligence reserves. Together, we're going to break down the legal, political, and moral implications of recognizing Palestine while the war continues and Israeli hostages remain in the grips of Hamas. Maurice, I want to start with you. As we're sitting here right now, this UN conference is going on. They're talking about a two-state solution. We all know that last weekend, France said that in September at the UN General Assembly, it will recognize Palestine as a state. And there are other countries that are likely to make this announcement, maybe even before this airs tonight. Is the UN's push ignoring the reality, on the grounds? Hamas is still in power.
The UN push, and definitely the lead by France, is nothing other than a reward for terrorism. This discussion of a Palestinian state and recognizing a Palestinian state, specifically now, after the October 7 massacre, is exactly what Hamas wanted. If we look not at Israel's goals for the war, what were Hamas's goals for this war? Firstly, they wanted to murder as many Jews as possible. That they truly succeeded. Secondly, they wanted to drive the international push for recognition of the state of Palestine. And here you have President Macron playing exactly into that narrative, following Spain, following Norway, following countries that should actually know better and understand that the worst way to move forward in the Middle East is unilateral recognition of another terror state. That will not bring peace. It will not bring about the creation of a Palestinian state. It will only undermine everything that is being done. It pushes the Palestinians into a corner. How can they say that we're now willing to negotiate when France has recognized Palestine already? Spain has recognized Palestine. So what is there left to negotiate? And they understand violence pays.
So, Dan, I want to turn to you to respond to this. I mean, especially considering that the French government is saying that, well, we're doing it not for Hamas, but actually in order to bring about peace, because if the Palestinian Authority will be given this state, essentially Hamas will become obsolete. What do you think?
Well, first of all, anytime the French or any institution in the EU, especially in the UN, which we understand the biases against, the long-held deep biases against Israel in the UN, do something like that, we have to take that into account. Secondly, we need to take into account there's a lot of political theater for domestic purposes. France has never been especially pro-Israel, let's say, and they also have a very large domestic Muslim population, and we know the younger generation in Europe, increasingly in the United States, by the way, is deeply and increasingly anti-Israel. Let's put all that aside, and I think we can all agree on that. We have to look at a number of elements here that Israel's not helping its own case. Right? Israel has yet to articulate any kind of end goal. There is extremist language coming from ministers who, it's not even clear that they set policy, but that those talking points are picked up on. And countries like France, who are trying to play something constructive in the international arena, are coming out and they're trying to walk that thin line between, and certainly initially supported Israel's war against Hamas, which we had initial support that it was a just war, everyone was behind it. But what's the endgame? And here's the problem. Israel hasn't articulated an endgame. What does this look like? Okay, this isn't a war against the Palestinian people. We've said that time and again. Then who are the good guys and who are the bad guys here, and how does this end? We have consistently pushed off any kind of talks with other Palestinian entities that are not Hamas. And so, it's not that I disagree with my friend here, Maurice, but I will say if we just come out against it and be, as we say in Hebrew, the dubi lolo, right? We always say, no way, we're going to stand against it. This is anti-Semitic, this is anti-Israel. I'm not sure that's going to help our case. And I think what we need to keep doing is playing the Arab game and saying, yes, but. Yes, but. Who is the other entity? What does this end? We have to walk a very careful line here because it can be very quickly picked up as violence pays, but we also then have to reward attempts at diplomacy. And I think we need to use this moment to galvanize the entire region, which is actually behind this, and the international community. And once again, Hamas is the bad guy. Hamas cannot have any future in any kind of Palestinian entity, autonomous state, whatever you want to call it.
So let me ask you this, though. I mean, let's say that, France and all these others follow suit. There were already, of course, Spain and other countries that have said it before. But is it even legal? I mean, is it possible for a country to recognize a Palestinian state?
Well, so the countries can recognize whatever they want. They can recognize Narnia, for all intents and purposes, as a legitimate state. It's the same as recognizing Palestine. The question is whether that has any legal implications. Recognizing a state within the UN mechanism has a specific process. It has a committee which really judges and evaluates claims for or requests for recognition of statehood. That committee has met several times regarding the request of the Palestinians and has consistently found that they don't meet the requirements to be recognized as a state. So the French can recognize. What are they recognizing? They're recognizing the state of Palestine in what borders? Does that mean that they've now decided that Jerusalem is no longer part of Israel? Have they got that ability? Obviously not. Have they got the ability to say that Gaza is now part of the Palestinian Authority and under the auspices of Mahmoud Abbas? Mahmoud Abbas has no control there for the last 20 years. He hasn't visited there for the last 19 years. What actual governance does he have there? So what are they recognizing? What's this state of Palestine?
So if it can't move forward to an actual Palestinian state, then I guess the question would be, is the two-state solution at all even viable? And I would also have a flip question about Yehuda and Shomron. So first of all, when we look at polls, really over the last decade plus on both the Palestinian and the Israeli side, right, we see that the most citizens of these areas do not actually believe in a two-state solution. That there's a conference happening right now. So it's not legal, but it won't be a legal entity, but is it viable at all? I mean, why don't you start and you respond?
That's the problem with the French and the Norwegians and the Spanish. They're trying to tell the Palestinians what you really want is a two-state solution, when they themselves say, no, we don't want that. We want a one-state solution, Palestine, Arab only, no Jews. And the French are trying to tell them, oh, no, that's unreasonable. Obviously, you want a two-state solution. They don't. Dan,
what do you think?
I'll say, there's a third element here that kind of brings about this, and we tend to ignore it in the Israeli discourse. And that is, and it's hard, certainly, even as a close observer as I am, it's hard to discern what is reality, what is talking points, what is hyperbole here. And that is the situation in what we call Judea and Samaria, what the world tends to call the West Bank, right? And you hear accusations time and again of creeping annexation, demolishing or seizure of houses and properties, constant clashes between settlers and Palestinians. And it's always a he said, she said as far as the media is concerned. We rarely come out looking like the good guy in this case. Our issue is here is, what is our policy? What is our strategy? Right? And I'm not sure what the correct, that's a political decision for the Israeli voter to decide, but we have never articulated what is our clear strategy, what do we consider Israel and not Israel, where is rule of law in these instances, and we do have to recognize that these kind of moves and the frustration, and this move by the French and the others is an act of frustration with the Israelis as much as it is trying to orchestrate the appearance of doing something for the Palestinian cause. And that I'll say lastly here on the future of a two-state. There's no viable two-state solution right now because there's no one who can implement any kind of state, not in the West Bank, certainly not in Gaza, right? And so there is if you poll the average Israeli today, you'll get about 30%, 25 even percent.
Right, which has gone down tremendously because it used to be 75% 15 or so years ago.
The question is, both for the Israeli public and for the decision makers here, is what does that mean? Does it mean certain territories, all territory, demilitarized? Is Hamas in power? Is Hamas not in power? Are you talking about now in 2025? It's not realistic at all, or in 5 years? And what I would suggest here, and I'll end on this note, we need to set such a high bar of what we want to see and adopt a yes, but strategy. This is what a potential partner in the Palestinian governance areas would look like. They have to they have to demilitarize, they have to de-radicalize, they have to de-radicalize the education system, the media system, the stop the pay for slay, and they have to start talking about living alongside Israel, right? And as opposed to the internal Arabic discussion, which is Israel as invaders and colonizers, et cetera, et cetera. And then that's a discussion that I think we can enter more wholesomely.
Go ahead.
Part of the problem here, I would suggest, is that we tend to see the Palestinian side divided into two camps. There's the evil Hamas, and then there's the moderate Palestinian Authority. The bad news is the Palestinian Authority is no better than Hamas. In fact, it's actually worse. They are the ones that have the control of the schools, that have educated, brainwashed children to get up in the morning and go out and murder Jews. As Dan mentioned, they're the ones who have an institutional, legislated program to incentivize and reward the murder of Jews. That's not Hamas. That's the Palestinian Authority. There is no other side which is moderate that you can even discuss. And so what I suggest is that, and following, I was actually this morning just in a hearing in the Knesset, following the historic vote last week, where 71 members of the Knesset voted in favor of applying Israel's sovereignty, applying Israel's law to Judea and Samaria. That, I would suggest, is the way forward. We need to, as Dan said, stop with this stuttering regarding our connection to Judea and Samaria. It is part of the Jewish homeland. It will remain part of the Jewish homeland. And I would suggest that it's time that Prime Minister Netanyahu came out and said there will be no other state that will ever be created to the west of the Jordan River, because this is all Israel. And that's, whilst we are constantly hesitating and we leave it open, well, maybe it is ours, maybe it isn't ours, the French can step in and say, well, it's not yours, it's the Palestinians.
So, and I think I actually wanted to bring that vote up because that is the first time that we've seen such a large, any vote, I believe, but such a large vote for sure in terms of annexation. But what I also understand is that it's just a rubber stamp of like approval, the same way that the Knesset has voted now, I think twice, that there will not be a Palestinian state west of the Jordan River. So they voted that we will annex Judea and Samaria, but they're not really going to do anything about it. And I think the question that we need to tackle then is, why are we not doing anything about it? As you said, it is pretty much understood that at least by most Israelis, the areas that are biblically tied to Israel, which certainly predominantly exist in Yehuda and Shomron, whether it's Shiloh, Beit El, Hebron, etc., belong to Israel. Shechem belong to Israel. So, okay, why are we not taking the step and doing it?
That's the hesitation that started already back in 1967 when the government of Levi Eshkol couldn't decide what to do with the areas that we had liberated from the Jordanians and from the Egyptians. And unfortunately, that policy has just remained part of the discussion. It then really took a turn for the much worse in the 90s with the Madrid conference and then with the Oslo Accords. It's something that we've driven ourselves into a position where Hamas comes into power, legitimately elected by the Palestinians, and then carries out a massacre. We have to change that trajectory. We have to finally recognize that the 30-year-long Oslo experiment has failed. It's been a bloodbath for Israelis and for the Palestinians, and we have to choose a different path.
Do you agree? Can we choose a different path?
I think there are multiple options on the table, and we have to have a serious societal and electoral discussion on them. I want to take you back, though, to what's happening in Europe, what's happening in the international community. This is a clear statement from the international community that the status quo, this indecision on the part of the Israeli government, if this Knesset decision is a rubber stamp, as you describe it, what is the future of our relationship as the State of Israel to Judea and Samaria, and most importantly, to the 3 million or so Palestinians who live there and do not have citizenship in Israel, right? And that's a very tough question. What we're hearing from the international community, people who are, I'll call them fair weather friends of Israel, like the French, etc. They are allies sometimes, and we do need to recognize that. They recognize Israel's existence. They want to see, and they have been saying this for decades, they want to see some kind of Palestinian entity, independence, rights, etc. We have the danger here that what's going to happen with this kind of diplomatic initiative that we're not taking any kind of diplomatic initiative or strategic initiative, but if we just hold back and boycott and be the only ones to sit out such initiatives rather than to put our vision forward, whatever it may be, then it could dangerously legitimize Hamas. And so we need to ensure that whatever comes out of this, that we have some kind of seat at the table, that we are ensuring that Hamas is absolutely delegitimized, persona non grata, is completely demilitarized, and however this Gaza conflict ends and winds down, and it looks like the international community is really pushing to wind it down, it has to be absolutely clear and restated by the international community. Hamas is the instigator, Hamas is at fault, and Hamas can have no part in the future of Gaza or any Palestinian.
And I do think that we need to point out that Maurice had mentioned that there's a lot of incitement, terror, and certainly extremism in the side of the Palestinian Authority as well. So it's not just Hamas. It should be the concept that Palestinians will not be able to continue to survive or eventually thrive in this area if they cannot live side by side in some capacity or in Israel, whatever that strategic plan looks like. Now, I want to take a jump real fast to Gaza itself and the humanitarian aid situation, which we've seen really blow up also in the last week, with Israel now providing additional opportunities for aid, humanitarian corridors, humanitarian pauses, but based on pressure from the international community. And we've seen all these images of starving Gazans, many of which have been debunked that are potentially fake news. What is really going on? Does anybody have an idea? Are children dying in Gaza? Who is to blame, Maurice?
I think you can't look at Gaza as one solid and single entity. There are three different areas in Gaza. You have the southern area of Gaza, where the Gazan Humanitarian Foundation is working, has been working since the 26th of May, very successfully, giving out some 93 million meals. So there you can't say that there's any type of real cause for starvation. You have the central area of the Gaza Strip, where pretty much until now, Israel hadn't even operated. In the central areas of Gaza, where you still see, that's where you see the pictures of the shops, of shawarma shops, of cafes that are still working, of marketplaces full of goods, of chocolates, of everything that you want to see. That's there, that's area. And then you have the northern area of the Gaza Strip, where that's really been where the UN has meant to be working, but is refusing to cooperate with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, is refusing to actually do its job in the northern area of the Gaza Strip, because the UN is there to support, unfortunately, and I don't say this lightly, they are there to support Hamas and the continued governance of Hamas, to make sure that Hamas survives another day to fight against Israel. And so they are intentionally trying to create and really engineer this starvation, which they've been claiming. I reread an article this morning from over a year ago where the UN was already claiming that there's mass starvation in Gaza. They've claimed this over and over again.
But Maurice, and Dan, maybe you can respond to this. I don't want to blame Israel in any capacity. It's just, only, I should say, blame only Israel in any capacity. But it can't be that every NGO, and we heard 20,000, I think it was, women and children treated by UNICEF. The World Food, organizations are responding and saying, no, there's an acute problem. The food is either not being distributed, it's not the right kind of food. Something is going on.
There's a lot of key problems. First of all, what Maurice said, the distinction about the different parts of Gaza, I think is critical to understand. Gaza is not just Gaza, right? And the Abu Shabaab-controlled areas in the south are very different from the central areas, Deir al-Balah, etc., in the north. That's very important to understand. Secondly, there's a difference between the food being technically in the borders of Gaza versus does it reach the people. And here you have to look at a number of elements, right? Before all of that said, it needs to be made absolutely clear, because Hamas's PR machine, which is working fantastically, we should all be taking notes from Hamas's PR machine, has made the world understand that there is absolutely a humanitarian disaster and everyone's on the brink of starvation, and their name is not mentioned once in any of this, right? And the world and the international media is picking up on this, and therefore you see a lot of pressure. That said, there is a crisis, right? To say Israel is at fault, I think, is a stretch. I think Israel has made some mistakes as far as certainly kicking out or sidelining the UN, which is the right move, because I agree that they're in power not just to keep Hamas in power, but to keep their own money-making business, right? The peace business, so to speak, of UNRWA and all the associated UN entities. But the GHF mechanism, it's a good idea. It seems to not be enough. And what happens is the food gets in, but then it is hijacked, or the people going to the GHF locations, the 93 million meals that have been distributed, are picked up by people who work for Hamas or sell it to Hamas, and then that food is sold at exorbitantly high prices. And so a lot of the people who don't have the connections, the protectia, so to speak, or saved up income, they go to the markets, they can't buy it, or there's canned foods, it can't be cooked, there's flour, there's rice. So there clearly are a lot of problems. Hamas is purposefully exacerbating them in order to make itself relevant again, and in order to get a hold on power. But we need to be a lot smarter, and we need to, I've heard a lot of people saying we need to flood the zone in order to take care of this, in order to take care and make sure there really isn't a real humanitarian crisis.
And meanwhile, there is a question of whether or not we're going to actually end the war based on the international pressure, or whether or not we're actually going to step up our military activity, which are both seem to be equally on the table, certainly as Hamas has declined to sign any deal. We only have about 2.5 minutes left. Maurice, I want you to take that question and tell me, are we going to step up military activity? And with that, should we?
If we have the basic understanding that Hamas will never release all of the hostages, never, as part of a negotiated deal, we have to understand that at some stage, we are going to have to do it ourselves. And the sooner we do it, the better. That requires, yes, ramping up the military operations, making sure that we go in and bring every last hostage back now as soon as possible today. Rather than waiting for another 60 days, it took us 4 months to get back to where we were before the last ceasefire. We've got nowhere since then. That is what we need to do to be able to finish this war once and for good. Get rid of Hamas, bring the hostages home.
Dan, respond, 1 minute.
We've seen how creative Israel, the Israeli government, Netanyahu, the decision makers know how to be on Iran, on Hezbollah. I'm not seeing the same creativity here in Gaza. I don't know if there's intelligence that we don't know. So far, we've seen it's incredibly hard, if not impossible, to militarily rescue these hostages. We see the pressure campaigns not working. We need to either find a way to wind this down, or if they know something that they're not telling us, which I hope is the case, they have a plan. But we need to have an endgame. We need to have a communications plan, which I'm not seeing. We need to build regional and international alliances to be able to wind this down and score, chess moves on the diplomatic field, on the strategic field that I don't see playing out right now. And if these things are happening behind the scenes, I'll be gladly surprised. I'm just not seeing any indications of this right now. If staying just means continuing to lose soldiers, continuing to lose international legitimacy with no real outcome, then we need to figure out a way to wrap this up.
Dan, do you believe that when we look back at this war in 5-10 years, that we will be considered the winners of this war?
It all depends on what we do next. And if Hamas is allowed to stay in power, maybe not at the outset of this war, we might have lost that, but then we need to very aggressively, politically, in a communications manner, define what it means to win and ensure that Hamas has absolutely no future in Gaza, in the West Bank, in any part of what's considered a Palestinian territory.
So that's unfortunately all the time that we are going to have this seated meeting, but I really do want to thank both of you for being here, Dan and Maurice. I want you to stay with us for continuing coverage here tonight on ILTV. We have our 24/7 streaming channel and our newsletter that you can sign up for, as well as our application. Until next time, I'm Maayan Hoffman. Have a safe and pleasant evening.